I'm Runga here with Sorry, Were You Saying Something? I'm here with my co-hosts Randy and Rax, and today we're going to be talking about mental health and particularly how the conversation around mental health has evolved throughout our lives and how it has, in some instances, turned from a quest for acceptance and understanding and instead transformed into an excuse to be used to justify behavior rather than grow as a person or have empathy for your fellow human being. So today we'll be discussing that topic.
Huh? I'm sorry. What were you saying?
Okay, okay, thank you, Randy. But yeah, so I figured the conversation could start with the concept of how, because we're all around the same age group. I'm the youngest. Randy's age is nebulous, and Rachel is older than me. Every time
What
I
does that
ask you,
mean? What do you mean that his age is nebulous?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to
What does
Google
he
every
that
time
exist
right
when
in
I
the
now.
asked
ether?
him, yeah,
What
essentially,
is
I
define
asked him
nebulous?
earlier how old he was, and he says you don't have to worry about that.
I said I'm old
How
enough.
old are you, Randy?
I'm 31. I had to think
Okay,
about
but
it.
what month? Because I can't be the old
May
hag here.
May
Do we got grandma?
1993.
We got Grandma Rachel, Grandma
I mean,
Rex.
I was born in November of 1992.
Then you have me beat by age by like 4 months.
So you are the old hag.
No. I'm the middle.
Yeah.
Oh shit! So I'm the crone.
you're you're the oldest child that the parents made all the mistakes on. Randy's the one everyone forgot because I'm the baby.
That sounds right. You're the maiden, he's the mother, I'm the crone. That's fantastic. We love that
That's good.
for us.
But either way, we're all kind of around the same age, and one of the things I like to say when it comes to our age group and how we evolved and how we developed is we developed with the internet, whereas Gen Z developed with the internet. The internet was already a thing; it is what it is now. Whereas, like YouTube, for instance, didn't come out until I was 13. So Randy would have been 14, and Rachel, you would have been 27. Um,
Precisely. And you had better be nice to your elders.
gotcha. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Um,
So YouTube came out in 2005.
2006.
2006.
In 2005, it was a dating app, or it was a
Oh.
dating website. It was a dating website that was designed to you would post videos about yourself rather than a thing. And the creators of it actually, the first video they posted was one of them going to the zoo, and then they quickly realized people don't give a shit about dating on this website. They just want to post funny videos about themselves, and it became what it is today over time. Um, but because of that, we got to see a unique part of society or a unique part of cultural growth that was one, the internet becoming a thing, but also with that came the topic of mental health. And I think part of that came to the fact that it's a lot more comfortable to talk about your mental health to a screen than it is to, like, for instance, I became a lot more open with my therapist when COVID hit because all of my therapy appointments became virtual. So it's a lot easier for me to talk to him through a screen than it was in person. And I think that kind of helped start the mental health conversation, where it started as a thing you didn't really talk about. You didn't mention you were the concern of being treated differently, the concern of not being accepted, and then it became a conversation where now it's just open in the ether. So like, what have you seen from my left to right, Randy? What have you seen throughout your age when it came to the topic around mental health and how it developed?
Okay. Well, uh, growing up, it was always one of those things that people just didn't talk about. You're depressed, going through something bad, whatever it was. Um, it was basically like, you might talk about it with the people closest to you, but you don't want to go around blasting that everywhere because it would be a situation where, employers would likely see that somehow, and then you just don't get hired if you're looking for a job or whatever. But times evolved, times changed. People are more accepting and wanting to speak about mental health these days. I mean, I know I didn't go and see a therapist until a few months before I met my now wife. Um, and I found out, holy shit, my mental health is terrible, and I had no idea. Um, but it was definitely a thing where it's definitely was hush hush, shut up, don't talk about it, look away if you see it, to now something where it's being more openly discussed and more accepting in workplaces and society in general.
Yeah, and I didn't even think about that, but you're right. When we were growing up, it was one of those don't talk about it for fear of your job type of things, and that has been illegal for a long time, but it was still that stigma was kind of there. And and I've seen as we've grown older that the mental health conversation has changed from it being you go and see a therapist because you're, on the verge of, not being with us anymore, for lack of a better way to put that, to everybody needs therapy. It's just like going to the doctor. It's just a little bit of a tune-up. This is very normalized, and we've also seen it go and have social communities and strongholds on the internet
Mhm.
as well, where we are socializing with others and we are basing our identities off of our mental health crisis as well, which was never something that we did before.
I think that's a big thing too. Is and we talked about it before we started the recording of self diagnosis. But then before tangent to that, like the fear of losing your job, even though it's still illegal now, it still happens. Particularly if you're in a position that has a clearance, if you're in a position that has a security clearance, you won't lose your job because of that mental health thing, but they will find a reason to pull your clearance, and then you will lose your job because big government and big security still sees it as well. If they're depressed, then what thing are they going to do because they don't care anymore? To the point where like my dad's a combat vet and he has severe PTSD, and it wasn't until fairly recently that me and him even ever told me about it, and he ever even really acknowledged it publicly or semi publicly. Um, it was obvious, but him actually acknowledging it, and he said like he won't see a therapist, he won't go to him about it until he retires because could potentially lose his job. He has a clearance, he could potentially lose his job. Um,
That's
but then
incredibly unfortunate.
that's I mean part of the reason why I lost my job in the military, part of the reason I got kicked out of the military, stemmed to that whole thing. It was a few different reasons, but part of it was I was getting ready for deployment. You had to fill out a pre-deployment questionnaire, and part of it was a PTSD screening, and I filled it out honestly. And a lot of the questions were like, "Do you ever have panic attacks? Do you ever do this? Do you ever avoid situations because you're worried that it's going to cause you to have a panic attack? Do you do blah blah blah?" And it scored out of 60. Filled it out honestly, thinking, "Whatever, man. I'm gonna be deploying soon. I'm psyched for this because I was gonna be deploying to Japan. I was gonna do 6 months in Japan, getting per diem and eating sushi all the time. Fuck yeah." Filled that questionnaire out, and doctor comes back. It's like, "We need to have a chat. So you're gonna see a therapist. We can't force you to see a therapist, but you're going to see a therapist." And that stemmed into one of several things. The other issue was a combination of that and my sleep issues that I developed. That they're probably tied in together. The mental health stuff and then the sleep issues, they kind of feed cyclically into each other. But that all played a part into why I got kicked out of the Navy. And I just reenlisted. I wanted to do 20 years, so it was very much a thing where even in the military, despite the number of conversations we have about let's keep our troops mentally sane, it's still you really don't want to. If you want to keep your job, you really don't want to.
That's
Yeah.
incredibly unfair. And
Mhm.
obviously I've never been involved with the military. I have led a creative's path my entire life. So that world is so foreign to me. Although, the city in which I live right now, I live in Dayton, Ohio, which Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is a big thing here. So the Air Force is a huge thing in Dayton, Ohio, and I have a lot of friends that are involved and kind of caught up in that. Um, but it does seem really unfair, and you can maybe give me some more insight on this, but it does seem unfair that the reason that you might be scoring high on a PTSD screening is because of the work that you've done in the military, and then they punish you for that, and you don't
Hmm.
get to continue your career path.
Hmm.
And that I mean, it's not fair, it's not just. I mean, such is the way of the world, but that's got to be incredibly frustrating to a
Oh.
veteran.
Yeah, it's in that way. One of the things I ended up being told by a friend of mine that was actually a military doctor uh, was essentially that military medical's job is not to give you ongoing treatment; it's to get you back in the fight. So if you're in a situation where you're not going to be able to get back in the fight, why are you in? If you're not going to be deployable because you're going through ongoing treatment, bye. As I started going through mental health treatments, we had a lot of trainings at the command that were about mental health and about suicide awareness and about all that different stuff, unalive awareness. And the military's mentality on it, I heard a lot of my brothers and sisters in uniform say a lot of really fucked up shit that made me feel a little bit more guilty about it.
What is the culture in the military? I mean, you kind of already told us, but what is the culture surrounding mental health then? Because it sounds like if you're incapacitated by mental health, there are resources available for you, but your colleagues,
Yeah.
kind of won't show you that same support.
Yeah, and it's on an individual basis a lot of times. Like people have different mentalities to it. The greater culture of the military is one. Um, Mental health is one of the only things that you don't have to get a referral for anymore. It used to be you had to go to your primary care physician or primary care manager, talk to them, say I'm feeling this way, and then they would give you a referral, and then you could go to a therapist. Now it's because they've had so many instances of unfortunately people no longer deciding to be here. They are like, no, you can just call up this phone number and they will get you hooked up with a therapist, and no one can tell you no. Like your command cannot tell you no. Um, because with some medical stuff that's elective or not as important, your command can say you have to put that off until after this. You have to put this off after this. They can't do that anymore. But the culture is still publicly very. We're supporting our troops in their mental health crisis, but on a more unit level, you get made to feel guilty because if you are going to an appointment, that means someone else is having to do your job for that hour or two that you're gone.
Mm.
If you go to the fifth floor, which is the unalive ward of the hospital, that means there's a week now where someone else is having to do your job. So there's still that level of we're going to say we support this, but we don't.
Yeah, yeah, that has to be incredibly difficult,
Yeah.
disillusioning,
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. And, I think that culture is, I guess, somewhat shared, by, I guess what would you call us, not in the military, civilians?
Yes, yes, civilians.
Okay, yeah, I'm pretty sure I remembered that word correctly.
But let's get this back to the main topic. So we've all kind of discussed. Or Rachel, did you mention your point of how you saw the mental health discussion evolve as you aged into
Yes, I did.
a
Yeah.
fine wine? I'll say it nicely this
Um,
time. A fine wine.
yeah, no, and I kind of just said that if we're circling back around to that point, that I've seen it evolve to a social level where we are connecting with other like-minded people and using, and mental health is now not something that not only that we don't talk about, but it's a part of our identity, and it is how we relate to other people socially, which I find very interesting.
And that I guess we can easily transition into the second part of there's good and bad in that. There's good and bad in that because that's I oftentimes am not comfortable talking about my mental health issues with strangers or with whatever to a great degree, but I make it a point to bring it up, especially if I notice someone that I'm like they're probably dealing with something, to make it basically known that this is a conversation that you can talk about. Um, but what that has transitioned to, and something we talked about before Randy jumped into the call, was self-diagnosing. People going into these things and seeing this stuff and diagnosing themselves with mental illness and then using that as a way to explain away their behavior. Um, to a very like oftentimes unhealthy degree because they're not now solving their issues. They're saying, "Oh, I have depression, I have ADHD, I have OCD, I have autism, I have whatever this thing is." which explains my behavior, so it's not my fault. Um, which is when it starts to trend that line of being too far. Or there's a better way to say that, turn that line of being more detrimental than positive.
Yeah, I definitely have seen that, particularly with the rise of social media, that we have a lot of misdiagnosis and self-diagnosis, and I think part of that has to do with the health crisis that we have in the United States. People not having access to insurance or access to funds for mental health, and so they try to self-diagnose, and that's where we have a lot of these problems stem from. But I also just think it's social media culture
Mm-hmm.
now to self-diagnose, because I do think that you fit into a larger social network if you self-diagnose and you have that social network. And from a content perspective, unfortunately, it can be exploited to reach those thousands, millions of followers, and to be a content farm as well, because we've seen it time and time again where we have the inaccurate representation of mental health, or the inaccurate I'm autistic, or the inaccurate um, I have PTSD, or the inaccurate I have Tourette's, and I'm going to use this as my social media platform so that I can spin this into content and make money off of it.
Mm-hmm.
So like we I think we have the people that are it's very innocuous for them. They just don't really have the money for a diagnosis. They don't really they don't have insurance. They aren't able to do that. And then we have the people that are deliberately malicious, that spin it
Mm-hmm.
into being something that's more profitable.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad you brought that up too, because I do think there absolutely is a difference between not being able to afford and the deliberately malicious could afford it, or they, through, being a dependent on someone's insurance, could go out and get an official diagnosis. There definitely is a difference. Like, for instance, when I was looking into a potential diagnosis and I was talking it over with my therapist because it was upsetting me, at the time I was essentially told that, because I was stressing about money, and I was essentially told that it is based on everything what you're telling me, I would think that you would have this, yada yada yada. Uh, it is okay if in the time being that you, until you get like an official diagnosis or whatever, that you identify with having this. Um, but it's not a situation where you're doing something to be harmful to the community. If someone's just going out and being like, "I'm ADHD, I'm yada yada yada," and there's nothing to really back it up, then I'd say it's a problem. Like you were saying, if they're making it their whole platform. I'll be honest, I kind of derailed myself there. I don't know where I'm going with this, and so let's try to get back on track.
It's almost like that's ADHD. That's almost like that's a side effect.
Yeah, no, but I agree with you there, because um the uh I think I have this diagnosis. I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to talk about it with other like-minded individuals, because I really, really, really need that support. Does not bother me in the slightest. But it definitely can get really seedy, and we've seen that happen time and time and time again. And I don't know. You can monetize many different things. It is crazy to me that you can hop on a platform, pretend to have, pretend to have a personality disorder, and make money from that. That blows my mind.
And it's almost like too tangential to what you were saying of it's great that it is a conversation, that there is a community around it, because when I first got diagnosed, when I first started seeking treatment, or forced into treatment, but was in treatment, I refused to accept that I had anything. It took me. It wasn't until very, very recently that I accepted that I have PTSD. My therapist would say it all the time. My psychiatrist would say it all the time. But I'd be like, no, no, no. People have been through a lot worse than me. I don't have it. And it was just an incident where I was in a very tense situation. I started having flashbacks. I was like, oh, this was a few years ago. I was like, oh, maybe I should actually talk to my therapist about this seriously. But having that conversation, being able to talk to people and say, okay, you have this. This is what it feels like, because that's exactly what it feels like for me, and have the understanding like, okay, maybe this isn't just me being weak or me being whatever. Um, because when I first started going into treatment, and this tensions back to why I said I'll save the toxic masculinity thing for right now. When I first started going to treatment, I was mandated to go. Essentially, they couldn't mandate me to go, but they mandated me to go. Uh, and I go home after being told that I have an appointment in a few days. After being told that, I go home and I'm talking to my girlfriends like they're making me go to therapy. Blah blah blah. I could handle this. I'm fine. I'm good. I'm good. And she decided to start saying, effectively start going, yeah, you don't need therapy. You're a man. You're you're not weak. You're strong. You don't need therapy for this. You can handle this by yourself. You don't have an actual issue. Yeah, sprinkle a little bit of toxic masculinity on that. You don't have an issue. You don't need this. So that fed into my, especially because I was like 21 or 22 at the time, the toxic masculinity that I did have ingrained in me. So I went to that appointment. I went to that for that first appointment with the concept of, I'm not going to say anything to this woman. I'm not going to tell her anything. I'm good. I'm going to be the most belligerent patient possible. And luckily, my first therapist, Miss Brokaw, was a wonderful woman, and within 5 minutes, she had me like breaking down crying. Uh, Major grandma vibes. Major grandma vibes. Such a sweet lady. But if it weren't for that, if I had gotten my second therapist, who was also a military therapist, I would have never continued treatment. I would have gone there because he was not great. And he had a lot of toxic masculinity because he'd tell me, we're men. Yeah, this is just stuff that we deal with. I'm like, you're a fucking social worker. You're you're not supposed to say that.
Yeah, that's an important thing to say too. Whenever you don't have a lot of money and you go to therapy, you do run the risk of coming into contact with a therapist that isn't very well trained and has their own biases. And
Hmm.
that can really put you backwards on your mental health journey. And I'm not going to go into why I've been to a therapist and what I'm diagnosed with, because we're not putting that out there on the internet. Not today. Not today. Maybe some other time. But I've gone to see somebody like that, and they had their own biases, and about certain things that I was saying and doing, and that really, really, really set me backward
Hmm.
in in my own mental health journey moving forward. So, just wanted to kind of piggyback off of that point there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I hear that. I mean, I've only had two therapists, and uh both times both have been fantastic fits, but I know that for other people, it's not just about going to therapy, it's about finding the right fit for you and everything like that. And I know people that have jumped between like 6, 7 therapists until they found one that was good for them, and I found other people that, like me, get a first try. So
Yep.
I
I
completely understand.
see. I see the appeal then that, oh, I've been hopping around to 6 or 7 different therapists and this is not working and I'm spending a lot of money and I'm not getting my results. Oh, well, here's this online echo chamber
Hmm.
that I feel like I'm getting something from. I don't have to pay for this. This is easy. And we just kind of fall into that, right?
Yeah.
And it easily exploits us as people.
Yeah. Especially because I think a lot of those turn into people using you to justify themselves. Because the more people they can get in that are like, yes, yes, you're like this too. Yes, you're like this too. It's not our fault. It's not my fault. I'm not responsible for this behavior because we're all like this. And then don't seek the sort of help they need, and very particularly don't seek the sort of growth they need. Because like kind of back to something that we were talking about earlier, of it's perfectly okay to identify with these things and talk to these people and identify with this feeling, if even if you don't have the diagnosis yet. Where it becomes a problem, and I know I've dealt with this, and I know Randy's dealt with this if he wants to talk about it. Of I've had several exes, amongst various degrees, use mental health as their excuse for treating me poorly.
Mm.
And the one I can think about most recently that Randy does know is someone I was dating a few exes ago, that anytime I would try to, over the course of relationships, I've kind of learned how communication works with me. So what it is you've done something that upsets me. I'm upset right now. I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna go somewhere else. I'm gonna go to the gym. I'm gonna go shopping. I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna calm down. I'm gonna think about what I'm saying, what I'm upset about. Think about how I'm wrong here. Think about how you're wrong here, and then I'm gonna present that. Hey, this happened. It upset me. This is how I think I could have handled it better. This is how I think you could have handled it better. How do we improve from here? And I did that with this person, and every time I did that, it would come down to, well, I'm autistic, so it's not my fault, essentially. Some variation of, I'm autistic, so it's not my fault. I have depression, so it's not my fault. I have anxiety, so it's not my fault. Of, well, at one point, it was quite literally, she had done something that was very dismissive to my feelings. And what it was very specifically was a lot of times what people see of me is a mask. Like, this is my outward personality, but it takes emotional energy to put that on. I was doing something for school. I was going to my marine science class or my marine diving class for school, or scientific diving class for school. So I spent an entire weekend with a whole bunch of people that all they ever saw of me was bombastic, outwardly very bubbly Zach. And I had to keep that mask on for 72 hours. So on the drive back, I texted her and I said, I am very overwhelmed right now. I need comfort. I am not okay. I went to the house, I sat down on the chase, and I just started tearing up and like I was just overwhelmed. She gets up, comes, hugs me, goes back to playing her video game, doesn't say a fucking word. That was it. This was the first time, and I've been married before this. This was the first time I allowed myself to even begin to cry in front of a partner. The first time I was like, I'm going to try to be vulnerable in front of a partner, because as growing up as a man, and in my household was more traditional. Uh, it was a man's job to shut up, handle the problem, and shove it all down into a little hole that will eventually turn into a tumor and kill us when we're 60. Uh, so this is the first time I tried to do that. I went from being very sad to being hurt to being kind of angry. I left, I went to the gym, I got a workout in, I came back and I tried to talk to them about it. And their response was quite literally, I'm autistic. I can't handle that. It's like, and I can't handle that in more in the way of saying, it's not my fault that I didn't acknowledge you. Not in a, I can't handle emotional complexity, but more in a, it's not my fault that I didn't acknowledge you. I was too into my own thing.
You know, something that I've always said when it comes to understanding people, and hopefully this helps, is that uh, we need to look at the motivations of people to truly understand them, right? And we
Mhm.
need to look at the behind the scenes. So you know, a lot of things make up a person and make up the way that they behave. So if they have, you know, autism, for example, ADHD, you know, PTSD, any number of things that, you know, might affect your behavior. However, I have always said that your motivations you can understand, but they are never an excuse.
Exactly.
Ever.
And that's the big thing, and that's where like kind of where I was trying to go with this, and I completely lost the plot because now I was just bitching about an ex. Um, of it's a matter of, it is an explanation but not an excuse. So I have ADHD, which can cause me to lose some time. I have OCD, and I can get sensory overloaded. I can get really bad sensory overload, and I have depression, anxiety, and PTSD, and a whole bunch of other stuff that can cause me to act a certain way. I'm gonna I'm gonna Tess just walk by. Ooh. um, I'm going to acknowledge that. I'm when I apologize for how my mental illness causes me to act, I'm not gonna say I'm sorry I have this thing. I'm gonna say I'm sorry I acted this way because of this, but I'm going to acknowledge that I did that, and I'm going to improve upon that, which is the difference. Are you saying I'm sorry, but, or are you saying I'm sorry and?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but this isn't my fault. Or I'm sorry and I will be better. And in those cases, it's perfectly understandable. It's as long as there's an active effort to improve, it's perfectly fine.
Now, I do want to bring this up in regards to what you're talking about, Zach, in your situation where your former partner was stating that they were not able to comfort you or understand what was happening because of the autism.
Mhm,
Because, I think both of us have been through a lot of therapy and stuff.
mhm.
I understand that you were having a very difficult time during those 72 hours where you had to put on this outward mask. You needed to find a way to recuperate and recharge. But I suppose, and maybe this might be taken a way I don't intend it to,
Mhm.
but is it possible that during that moment, and I'm not excusing the behavior, that what you were looking for is not something that they could provide, and they were using it as a means to try to explain why they could not provide it? Because
I
ultimately, does that go on them, or does that go back to a sense of? Because another thing I want to bring up too is that Zach, you are someone who is a ride or die, will be there for someone no matter what. And part of me is wondering, like for instance, if I came to you and I told you, Zach, I'm having a horrible day, I really need someone to be there for me. I know you'd be there for me, but
mhm.
not everyone can be that way. And when there's people, because I tend to be that way most of the time too. When we offer that to someone, and then on the reverse side, we don't get that back when we really need someone, it can hurt. Does that still, that ownness of the responsibility of recuperation and how others act and like and needing to heal, does that still go towards the other person?
I think no, it doesn't. But I think it's not so much because that's when I went away and I went to the gym and I did whatever I had to do to kind of understand how I was feeling and understand why I was upset and what upset me. The conversation, what it came back to, wasn't you did this thing that upset me. And I don't think I made this clear earlier. It wasn't you did this thing that upset me and we need to talk about it. It was this upset me. This is what I need in the future. This is how I need to handle this in the future. And it just turned into, well, I'm autistic. It's like, okay, I get that. And what I'll often say when it comes to stuff like that, when it especially comes to some sort of behavioral disorder that causes people to not understand people on the same level, because I have a little bit of that too. I've been told possibly autistic, and then when I was like, when my therapist was like, "Do you want to pursue this?" I was like, "I honestly don't care. I'm not gonna go through the rigmarole of getting diagnosed." Because I sometimes have trouble understanding people's intentions or stuff. There's been so many times, like with the two of you, there's been so many times when like you've given responses, like to text or something that are very like quick and short, and like I recognize that it's because you're busy, but I'm immediately like, oh, did I piss them off? Did I, did I piss them off? How do I handle this? Um, so what I say with a lot of times with those sort of behavioral disorders is I'm going to explain to you why this was upsetting and then what I need from this, what I need in this situation, because then future actions aren't a matter of you not knowing; it's a matter of you not caring, and whether that is a result of this behavioral condition or not, it does frame our relationship. Because if you have some sort of behavioral disorder that causes you to not really empathize or sympathize with people as much, then that is a part of who you are, but that's not we don't work anymore.
I think I'm following now. So instead
Yeah.
of just being like, here's what I need from a partner in the future, and the response just being like, I am autistic, and then that's that with no option to improve. It's instead a much more better response would have been, um, I struggle with the concept of being there for other people, likely due to part of my autism diagnosis. However, I will make efforts to try to
Yeah.
be better in this regard. Something like
Yeah.
that would
Yeah.
have been better. Okay, I'm just
Yeah.
making sure I understand.
And an acknowledgement of what happened was hurtful and that there will be an attempt to improve it for the sake of the relationship.
Okay,
But I also fully recognize that there's some people that just their behavioral differences, the relationship doesn't work. And that's perfectly fine. That's just a thing. Sometimes people's way of processing asking them to change that so much as asking them to change who they are, and in that case, why not find someone else?
You know, in the same regard too, talking about, you know, mental health as an excuse. Uh, you did mention it's just like, you know, Randy, you've experienced this kind of stuff. I'm not going to and no shade intentionally thrown or anything like that. I'm not trying to bring up my past relationships or anything like that just because that's not at
Yeah,
a state where I am right now to want to do
yeah,
that. But I will talk about someone who was a former friend of my wife and I, who I'm gonna rename to Sally for this thing. Because it's kind of close, but I'm not saying the name, so haha.
This
Uh
is great because Grave Shadow's mascot, her name is Sally.
oh, there we go.
So
let's get
All
some
right, well,
merchandising options in here. Let's go.
Grave Shadow's mascot in particular, that Sally. No, I'm kidding. Um, but
Watch it be that person who just have this 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon going on.
so Sally in this instance was someone who did not grow up with a great upbringing, you know, not a lot of support from family, went off on their own. And when they did so, they made a lot of, I would call, growing mistakes. You know, they were doing shit like, well, they didn't have a lot of money and didn't really gain an understanding of how to get the money, so they would do things like Uber Eats and the stuff to, you know, prepackage people's orders from grocery stores and all that. But they would fucking steal from the food orders because they were hungry, you know? So they got banned from that.
oh,
Then they would work in an uh, office job, and they ended up quitting the office job because I guess it's a newer slur was used not to describe someone of like a race or ethnicity or religion, but in part due to a behavior. A word was used that has been used historically in the past, which I don't want to say it now because, you know, apparently it's a slur. Um, to describe someone who's acting erratic, right?
Ah,
SPAZ, I'll
gotcha.
spell it.
Yeah.
Uh, but they quit their job and then they went and the guy got a job working for the apartment complex they worked at. And while they're working at the apartment complex, they're severely depressed. They do an illegal sublease. They get people working living at their apartment that shouldn't have been there, and they start complaining to Sally, saying like, "Hey, you're not doing your part of living here. You're not helping with the dishes or anything like that." And they come back with, "Oh well, I'm depressed, so I'm not going to do it."
Mm,
And then there's also, well, I'm depressed, so I'm only going to DoorDash McDonald's and not do any grocery shopping and then make it so that I don't have any money. Essentially, just understanding and putting out there that, you know, depression is leading to certain actions, but then being completely not showing any willingness to try to make or change or do anything about it. And
mm,
then ultimately what ended up being was that reason I the person's now a former friend was because they kept doing actions and going to my wife, because she was closer with my wife, to try to get like an echo chamber of being like, is this okay? And my wife every single time would be like, no, you're being fucking stupid, stop it, you just put in the apartment complex that you paid rent when you didn't and you got caught, and you're doing all these fraud charges and everything like that. Like, what you're doing isn't fine. And she came back and was just like, well, I talked to my echo chamber and they said to call you a bitch and all this other shit. And it was like on Christmas Day, this past Christmas. uh
oh,
but like, it just goes into the sense of that I think it's a big maturity thing. um Maybe if I prepped it a little better, it'd sound better, but like the storytelling, but basically the sense of like, this person is using their depression as a means to get away with certain behavior that I wouldn't even necessarily say is, a lot of it is depression related, but using it as an excuse to not mature, not grow, not do anything to try to help themselves. Um, and it ultimately ended up ending like a whole friendship type thing because of it. And
Yeah.
I think if they were older, because this person was 20 and my wife and I were 30 at the time, so 10 years younger, I think they're older, things would have gone differently. And even then, my wife told me that it's just like if she was Sally's age when Sally had lashed out, that she would have lashed back out at Sally just the same too. Um, Man, I'm rambling again. Sorry. Does anyone else have any like other situations where they've encountered that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like that person was using the diagnosis of depression as a crutch. Um, and, everybody's experience with mental health is different, so I can't really say one way or the other, but that feels very disingenuous to me. A lot of the people that I know with depression, or I've had depression and have been medicated. The behavior that, at least I can just be like, you know what, we're just gonna start over, and I can just say that I'm gonna speak to my own experience. The behavior that I was exhibiting whenever I had depression and whenever I have depression, um, I didn't use it. I didn't weaponize it against other people. I didn't even understand why I was doing what I was doing and why I was saying what I was saying. Um, and once I learned that I was indeed depressed and that's why my behavior was reflecting that, I sought to change my behavior instead of explain it away with a diagnosis. And I realize that not everybody is going to take that approach. But that is the healthy, mature adult way to handle that. Now, you did say that she was 20 years old, and as somebody who is almost 32, I see that and I go, "Oof, okay, this sounds like a 20-year-old."
Yeah.
I mean, no shade to anybody who's younger. Obviously, you can have much more mature people that are younger. But I have been teaching music for 14 years at this point. I have seen kids of all ages, and I have seen those kids, hit 18, they grow up and they still, take lessons with me, and they still talk to me on a regular basis, and they're under the age of 25. And some of those behaviors, I'm like, oof, okay, I remember being really stupid when I was that age. So, I'm going to kind of explain this away with age a little bit, not to patronize anybody or make them feel bad about themselves. But, also it does sound like the weaponization of her diagnosis is what she was using as that crutch. And I really just hope that with some life experience and some more treatment, that those behavior patterns will change. And it's very unfortunate that you both went through that, because I don't know if I could deal with that with a friend. Sounds like a lot.
It was a
Yeah, and
lot, and we just hope for the best for them too. What were you saying, Zach?
Absolutely.
no, almost comes back to that same topic or how this kind of got introduced, of communities being built around this and people getting their diagnoses online, or hearing about it through online communities. Of a lot of them do tend towards, well, that's not your fault because you're suffering from this. So people are more like, well, okay, this isn't my fault because I'm suffering from this. But the problem becomes when you make your diagnosis someone else's problem. It is, if because when I get into really bad depressive spirals, like one of the ones is like, I'll stop shower. Well, I shower a lot because it's just I'll sit in my shower, but I'll stop, like, I'll be sitting in the shower and I won't brush my teeth. I'll have my toothbrush is right there, and it's like I just won't brush my teeth. I won't do this. I'll stop going to the gym. I'll stop doing a lot of things that are for myself. But as much as I could, I would still go to work. I would still do my job. I would, put on a happy face. I wouldn't try to bring anyone down. I wouldn't start, bring it into every conversation, which is something I see a lot with people, where every conversation you enter with them is about their mental health. And it's like, I don't have the emotional energy for this. And you are now making this, you're putting your, I don't want to say putting your burden, but you're putting your baggage onto me when I don't have the emotional capacity right now to handle that because I have my own stuff going on. But as much as I could, I tried not to make it other people's problems. At the same time, with one of my former partners that lived with me, uh, not the one I talked about most recently, but she would give me a list of like things to do because I was like fresh out of the military, so like I didn't have a job yet. I was driving Uber, but that's kind of on my own schedule, and I hadn't started school yet. She would give me a list of like things to do around the house, and I'd get some of them done, but not everything done because I was peak depression and so medicated that I could barely feel anything. And she'd get mad at me, come home, get very mad at me for like, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do all the things on this list? And at one point, I was like, I need to be 100% honest with you. Sometimes it's real, and I never said it's my depression. I was like, sometimes I just can't bring myself to do things. I can't. I'll get this thing done, and I'll sit down for a second, and then I can't get off the couch, and I'm really trying to figure this out, but I just can't figure it out. And she was the one that said, "You're just using depression as an excuse." I was like, "Yes, but no."
Yeah, no, I see you grappling with executive dysfunction more than anything.
It was it the reason? Yes, and was I whatever? But I was still doing things, but also like where's the nuance? Honestly, is the kind of what this is getting at. Where's the nuance of when is it you making an excuse and when is it actually a valid justification? Because executive dysfunction is a thing. And for me, it's when you're making it someone else's problem. So, like in your case, Randy, uh, they weren't paying their rent. They were stealing other people's food. They were harming other people through their direct action or inaction and saying, it's okay that I did this to you because of the fact that I have this. The only person that you're allowed to victimize in that case, that's not the right way to say it. The only person that you are allowed to force your own burdens onto is yourself.
And I think another
And
thing that goes, I'm sorry, please go
no,
ahead.
go on. No, I didn't have really
I
follow up.
think
I was just making a noise.
another thing to also talk about it is the way that both of you, like, in terms of the person I was speaking about, and you and your situation, is how you handled it. For instance, you didn't get to everything on the list, and you said, no, hey, depression sometimes makes executive uh, function, like it leads to executive dysfunction. The other person I'm talking about said, this is exactly how they said it to me. Of course the dishes are building up. I'm not going to do them. I have depression. There's a difference. There's a very clear difference between one using it as the excuse and the other using it as, there's a difference between excuse and a reason.
Yeah,
And you had a reason and had it built into like, hey, this is the actual reason is executive dysfunction that stems from the depression, and the other person is using it as, I have depression, therefore I will not do any house tasks.
it's almost like they got a little medical waiver for it. Like the doctor ordered don't do house tasks because it's too hard for you. Um, which is yeah, it's so that leads to nuance, and I just wanted to kind of mention that because I don't want anyone that happens to watch this to be like, oh, you're just saying it's always an excuse because no, sometimes it is a reason. Sometimes it is 100% a reason. But
Yeah,
it's when you put it on other people is when it's not fair because no one else should. You don't have the right to victimize anyone else.
no, you don't. And, I think everybody sitting here discussing this have all had our own struggles with mental health, and we understand it, and we've had diagnoses that are, not fun. And the last thing that we would ever do is pass judgment on somebody else who is
Hmm.
struggling. I just also think that even if you are struggling, you do have to take accountability for yourself in your own life.
This honestly perfectly segues into the last point that I have listed here. We've all talked about how it's personally impacted us. We've all talked about it being used as an excuse. We've all talked about how it's developed around us. Now, how this sort of behavior has impacted the mental health conversation as a whole.
Oof.
Because I think we've almost seen this, it's like a bell curve where when we were young, you didn't talk about it. And then it slowly creeped up. So it got talked about more, accepted. And now it's almost trending the opposite way because there is this small subset of people that are using it as the reason to justify their behavior. And now people are being less receptive to it because of that.
Well, I would look at, in terms of, there are some companies that have hit the news recently that are proudly putting out that they are not hiring younger people from Gen Z for that exact reason. And the age discrimination laws in those states where I saw this only protected people from, I think it was like 40 and older or something like that. So they could choose to not hire the lower
Got it?
age
No.
people for that reason. It's because the lower age people were coming in and had a different sort of work ethic or social norm than what the older people were used to. So they're choosing not to hire them. So again, it's going back to, it looks like affecting people's employability in that sense, which is really unfortunate because honestly, I think the way it should be handled is look at it on a case by case basis. Because even the people that are like of any age range, you have people that will use it to justify,
Mhm.
you know, negative or poor behavior or whatever, to get away with doing some really shitty things to other people.
Yeah.
But it does look like, from what I can tell, it is being used in modern day to going back to a sense of your job is likely going to be at risk if you even attempt to bring this up, and it's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I think that we got to a point of legitimacy that anything that is legitimized like that on a wide scale societal way, right? In a wide scale societal way, and it becomes a norm, can be exploited. And that's essentially what we had here. Is it became regularly talked about. It became a societal norm, and now it is at the point where it can very much be exploited by a very, very, very
Hmm.
small number of people. And I want to stress that it's a
Yeah.
very small, minute number of people that exploit it
Yeah.
and make it harder for other people. And also, I'm sorry, we are in the middle of a serious conversation, but side note, did your girlfriend just bring you a watermelon?
Yeah. She brought me a watermelon.
I mean,
Okay.
we're in the middle of a serious conversation, and
Yeah. Watermelon.
I had to look down and I'm like, oh, I think
Effect this has had on the mental health conversation as a whole. We were at the bell curve, talking about how the bell curve, how it went from, oh yeah, this was what I was going to say next, of it, because of the fact that it's become a thing like that, or it's become a thing where some people have used it now. Like the word safe space is almost a slur. The word safe space, like, well, I mean, people use it very negatively, especially certain subsets of people use safe space. There was a point in time where saying safe space, or the concept of safe space, is like, yeah, your home is your safe space. This is your safe space. This is a place where you go where you don't have to deal with those things. Where now it's, you'll see it used in a almost derogatory fashion of, well, they just need their safe space. They just need their safe space. They need their mental health day. There's nothing wrong with the concept of a mental health day, but now, because the conversation has entered that, the counterculture to that conversation is using the terms and the vocabulary used by that culture as in an almost derogatory fashion, which is led to this us or them mentality amongst a lot of people, kind of thing.
Same kind of deal with the same terminology being like thrown in snowflake there
Yeah.
with it and all that. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
you know, I think it's that part of that is definitely mental health has been politicized, and we will not get into that discussion.
Yeah.
But that is just a fact. Mental
Yeah.
health has been politicized, and I think that's why we have um, we have this big rift between those that are very supportive of terminology like safe space and those that are not. And I don't think that those things should have been politicized, but we
No.
are human beings after all.
It's almost human nature to look at the enemy and hate everything about them. And it doesn't matter whether or not the thing that you're hating about them is good or not. You are going to dislike it because that is a something that represents something that you dislike. I think I think at this point we've kind of discussed all the parts of it. So if we want to do a quick outro, I've been Runga. This has been R Cubed with Runga, Rachel, and Randy. And join us next time for the next episode. We all have our own social media accounts. I will link them in the description below. And please do follow these wonderful people. It's a lot of fun. We get a lot of different vibes from them. If you want pure chaos, it's Rachel all the way. But if you want a much more calm but analytical approach to stuff, or just enjoyment, Randy's the way to go when he streams on Twitch.
To be fair, I can be very chaotic on my own too.
Yeah, says the
Yeah,
guy that put mustard on his fucking watermelon. I don't
if
even
you
want to
want
hear
someone that
that.
knows how to eat watermelon, you watch me.